Namaste and welcome along to Wednesday afternoon cooking with myself, Gayatri, at the Australian School of Meditation and Yoga. Today I'm going to be demonstrating how to cook sesame crusted tofu. This is a pretty simple recipe. It's a little bit fiddly, but it's very easy. And we're going to start off with a 450 gram block of tofu. I personally like the Aldi brand or the Macros sorry, I can't talk today. The Macros brand from Woolworths. So we're going to press this first. So what happens when we squeeze the moisture out of the tofu, it sort of acts just like a sponge. When you squeeze the sponge out, then you place it in water, it's going to absorb that water. So we're going to squeeze the water out of the tofu and then we're putting it into a marinade and it's going to absorb all that moisture, all that liquid from the marinade. So it does make for a much tastier dish if you do the squeezing first, the pressing. But I have done this without and it's still tasty. So if you're a busy mum, maybe just come home and don't bother about pressing. Otherwise, it's only half an hour. And that's probably enough to get most of the moisture out. So you could be pressing this while you make up your marinade and get your toppings ready. So I'm just going to place some serviettes on the bottom just to absorb the moisture so it doesn't just sit in the plate. I've got 2 rectangular plates here, but you could just use ordinary plates, whatever you've got in the house. And we're going to pop that block of tofu on there. Put a couple more on top and sit the plate on it. I've got a nice heavy mortar and pestle. It's made of stone, so it's very heavy. And I'm just going to place that on top and we'll leave that for half an hour and I will be back to make the marinade. And just one more thing I forgot to mention, I always give the tofu a really good rinse when I take it out of the packet. Make sure the water it sort of goes sometimes a bit stale smelling, so it'll just freshen up the tofu so it hasn't got that stale tofu smell. Okay, so I'll be back in half an hour. Okay, half an hour is up. So we just take the wet towels off. And we have our tofu. So I'm going to transfer the tofu now to a cutting board. And I'm going to cut the tofu. So usually you can get about 10 slices out of the tofu. So if you want to get them fairly even, you can just cut it in half and then 5. So I'm going to make these into triangles. So I'm going to cut each part into half and then half again, making it into a triangle. So I'm going to do this with all the tofu. So this is bite size. You can do them bigger if you like. Probably if I was at home when I had my kids, I would have just sliced it and done each slice rather than cut them up small. Okay, so I'm going to now make up the marinade. So we've got soy sauce. We have some coconut sugar. You could use brown or maple syrup if you prefer. I've got some rice wine vinegar. I've got a little bit of sesame oil. Just gives a lot more flavour, sesame oil, but you can omit this if you want oil-free. And I've got a little bit of garlic powder. Once again, you can leave the garlic powder out if you prefer. Okay, now I've got my whisk. I'm just going to whisk this together well. I'm going to put the tofu into a clip-lock bag or a Ziploc bag, whatever you like to call it. And I'm going to pour the marinade in, zip it up, Make sure there's no holes in it or it's going to make a mess. So we're going to pop this in to the fridge and let it marinate anywhere from 1 hour to overnight. Overnight is better though. I have tried all different ways with this. So I was testing it out for a cooking class and I found overnight gave it much more flavour. So I'll be back once the marinade has soaked into the tofu. Okay, so we have got our marinated tofu. So the first thing I'm going to do with the tofu is to drain the liquid off it, the marinade. I have got a couple of tablespoons of flax seeds or linseeds, sometimes they're called both, either or. So I'm going to tip that marinade into the flax. I'm going to add a little bit more water to this marinade and flax meal. Around about half a cup. Just mix that around well. So this is your first step because you want this to be sitting just for a little while to thicken up a little bit. So that's what I would do first. And then you can organise your second bowl. You can use any number of flours. You could use corn flour, tapioca flour, potato flour, gluten-free flour. This seems to stick really well. You could use ordinary flour as well. And then in the third bowl, I have a mixture of sesame seeds. I've got a mixture of black, white, and I've also put some panko crumbs, some Japanese bread crumbs in here. They lighten it up. You can do it without, but they're crispier if you use the panko crumbs. If you are gluten-free, you can still, this is a really good gluten-free one, you would just use tamari instead of the soy sauce, so make sure it's wheat-free. Your gluten-free bowl is fine, and in this one, instead of the panko, I would use crushed cornflakes, or you can get gluten-free breadcrumbs. So plenty of options there for gluten-free. Okay, so we will put the oil on. I've already heated it up a little bit. And then we're starting. So we start with I'll move these around so we get them into the right order. So we just dust it in the tapioca flour, which is what I'm using, in your flour, and then into the marinade and flaxseed mix, then into your breadcrumbs. Really pack it in well. You want them to be nicely covered. And then into the oil. Now you can pop these in the oven if you don't want to fry. You can just pop them on a baking tray with some baking paper and just bake them till they're crispy. So I'm going to do this with all of them now. So into the flour, into the flax mix. The flax is like an egg, so it keeps things together. It's sort of like our glue. We are done. So we have here sesame crusted tofu. You can have any sort of dipping sauce you like, barbecue, tomato, chili. You can make up your own sort of Japanese style. What we found is really good is mayonnaise. So let's give these a try. See how crunchy they are. So good. You can serve these up as a platter at parties, or it can be a side on your main meal. So enjoy. I'll see you again next week.